Hey guys, tonight we travel to the winding alleys of 17th century Istanbul, where the air smells of roasted spices, seawater, and something darker brewing in clay pots behind shuttered doors. The city is quiet, but never asleep. Somewhere in Nicaea, this empire of domes and decrees, someone is whispering over a cup of a mysterious black liquid, fragrant, bitter, addictive, and illegal. You pass a flickering lamp swinging gently over a cafe's back door. The windows are shuttered, but there's music inside, laughter and steam. Someone is breaking the law with a beverage. This isn't your average sleepy story about coffee's rise to fame. It's about an emperor who hated coffee so much, he sent spies into the night to sniff it out. A man so determined to keep people sober and obedient, he turned a cup of joe into an act of rebellion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're tuning in from somewhere special, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I always love seeing where these sleepy journeys are reaching. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, your sandals brushing against weathered cobblestones. The Bosphorus breeze slips under your robe, but the scent of roasted coffee keeps your mind focused. You've heard the rumors. Coffee is banned. It's been declared a tool of sedition. The Sultan himself has called it dangerous, and yet the cups keep clinking. Istanbul in the 1630s is a complicated place. The Ottoman Empire is vast, stretching across 3 continents, and the streets around you pulse with layers of culture. Arabic, Persian, Greek, Armenian, Turkish, it's all here, woven into the city's architecture, its conversations, its cuisine, and now, woven into a bitter little bean. You duck beneath an awning as rain begins to mist the stones. Above you, a minaret pierces the night sky, its call to prayer already faded. That's when you hear it, a soft grinding sound from behind a wooden door. Not a mill, not a loom. It's the unmistakable crunch of roasted coffee being ground into powder. A moment later, laughter escapes through a crack in the wall. You imagine the scene, old men playing backgammon, a poet reading verses no one's supposed to hear, a young scholar sketching stars into the margins of his notes, and all of them sipping from small porcelain cups, pretending the emperor isn't watching. You see, coffee isn't just a drink here. It's a movement. It's an excuse to gather, to talk, to think, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. But let's back up. Not too long ago, coffee arrived in the Ottoman world by way of Yemen. Its stimulant properties made it popular with Sufi mystics, who drank it to stay awake during long nights of chanting and prayer. From there, it moved northward, carried in sacks by traders and whispered about in letters. Before long, it had reached Mecca, Cairo, and eventually Istanbul. At first, coffee was a curiosity, then a delight, then a lifestyle, and then a problem. The chapter. Cafes of Istanbul started sprouting like mushrooms after rain. Some were simple stalls with stools and kettles. Others were grand salons with carpets, art, and musicians. They welcomed everyone: soldiers, scribes, merchants, misfits. It was said you could learn a language, hear a political joke, and fall in love, all over the course of one pot of brew. The drink itself, earthy, slightly acidic, with an aroma that stayed in your clothes longer than your prayers stayed in your head. It was made strong, boiled over coals, sometimes sweetened, often not. Served hot, in tiny cups with no handles. You didn't chug it, you savored it, like secrets. And there were so many secrets. Remember, this was a time when not everyone had access to books or teachers or even a quiet place to think, but in a coffee house. Suddenly the city's pulse was yours to feel. The news, the gossip, the ideas. You wander closer to one such cafe now, pressing your ear to the shutter. A deep voice is quoting a line of poetry. He who drinks from the forbidden cup dreams beyond the dome. It's beautiful, and also treasonous depending on who hears it, and someone will hear it. Because somewhere not far from you, one of the Sultan's spies is also listening. He's trained to pick out rebellious phrases, coded metaphors, too much laughter after dark. His job is to sniff out sedition, not by sword or scroll, but by scent. And coffee leaves a strong one. Historians still argue whether these spies actually sniffed cups or merely listened in. Some records suggest they pretended to be beggars, or worn-out pilgrims, or disinterested drunks. All they needed was proof of a forbidden brew. You hear footsteps and step back into the shadows. Someone's being dragged out. A young man with ink-stained fingers and a half-full cup still warm. No one screams. No one protests. Just one more customer caught mid-sip. Because in this empire, at this moment, that's all it takes. The rain thickens, and so does your unease. You pass a trash pile in an alley. Broken cups, burnt grounds, a cracked sign that once said, Kavajon, coffee house. Someone smashed it. Maybe under orders, maybe out of fear. And yet the smell lingers. It always lingers. Coffee may be banned, but it's also beloved. And as you turn the corner and head deeper into the city, you start to understand the scale of the tension here. This isn't just about taste. It's about control. Who gathers, who speaks, who thinks, and who drinks what while they do. You keep walking, the night thickening around you like cooled molasses. The alley narrows, the buildings lean in, and somewhere above a cat yowls in protest at nothing in particular. You're heading deeper into the city now, not just in distance, but in time too. Back to a moment when one man's opinion could silence 1,000 voices, or try to. The man in question is Sultan Murad IV, and if your legs are aching, it's because we're walking through his empire. He came to power in 1623, at the absurdly inconvenient age of 11, which in most empires would mean a cozy regency and lots of elaborate hats. But not in the Ottoman court, where being too young just meant everyone else was old enough to betray you. So while Murad was technically Sultan, it was his mother, Kösem Sultan, who ran things for a while. He was sharp, strategic, and terrifying in that calm, motherly way that probably made generals apologize for coughing. But Murad wasn't content to be a figurehead forever. By the time he reached his late teens, he'd had enough of being polite. He seized full control. With it, he brought a reign of, well, strictness. At first glance, you might think he was a reformer, and he was, sort of. Murad IV was obsessed with restoring order to what he saw as a lazy, unruly, decadent empire. His predecessors had allowed corruption to fester, and public morals, he believed, had fallen apart like a poorly stirred locum. So he cracked down. Hard. He banned alcohol. He banned tobacco. And yes, he banned coffee. All three of them were linked in his mind. They weren't just vices. They were tools of disorder. And more importantly, they were things people did together. You imagine yourself now inside a typical Ottoman cafe before the ban. Pillows strewn across rugs, low tables, cluttered with cups, a corner musician plucking the oud, an open door welcoming scholars, sailors, and the occasional stray dog. It's not loud, but it's alive. People talking politics, exchanging poetry, debating theology. Now imagine you're Murad. You see all this swirl of ideas and conversation, and instead of charm, you see threat. Historians still argue whether his hatred of coffee was born from paranoia, piety, or sheer stubbornness. Some claim he feared sedition brewing in every pot. Others suggest his own struggles with sobriety made him project guilt onto the rest of society. One fringe theory even claims he suffered from extreme insomnia and resented the bean that robbed him of peace. Regardless, he didn't just issue decrees. He enforced them personally. Yes, really. Murad IV was known for disguising himself and wandering the streets of Istanbul at night. Dressed like an ordinary citizen, he'd visit cafes, markets, even private homes, listening, watching, sniffing. If he caught you breaking the law, drinking, smoking, sipping, you didn't get a warning. You got executed. You pause under a low archway, heart thudding. The stories come back to you in whispers. The soldier who was beheaded for sharing a pipe with friends. the baker who was flogged for slipping a secret cup to a scholar, the cafe owner who vanished after the Sultan himself kicked down the door. They say Murad carried a massive scimitar under his robes, not for show, for judgment. But it wasn't just about punishment. He wanted to transform society, turn it away from indulgence toward discipline, and he truly believed that banning coffee would help. In his eyes, the cafes weren't centers of community. They were breeding grounds for resistance. Rebellion didn't start with swords, it started with ideas. And ideas, more often than not, were born in the curl of steam rising from a coffee cup. You reach a small plaza. It's empty now, except for the ghost of memory. This was once the site of a famous cafe, the Parrot's Beak, named for the way its wooden awning curled over the street. It drew everyone: janissaries, astrologers, exiled princes, ambitious barbers. Came for the drink, but they stayed for the conversation. Murad had it shut down in a single afternoon. Not a word of protest, just silence, the silence of fear. But still, people didn't stop. They went underground. Quite literally. You lift a cobblestone and there in your imagination is a hollow, a tunnel entrance, leading to a hidden cafe lit by oil lamps and hope. Secret passwords, silent toasts, and guards at every turn. Because where there's coffee, there's resistance. One mainstream historical fact: Murad IV's edicts were not symbolic, they were deadly. He executed violators personally. In 1633, after a fire devastated parts of Istanbul, he used it as a pretext to blame and punish the coffee houses he saw as dens of vice. One quirky fringe tidbit: there are legends, unconfirmed but irresistible, that Murad once tricked a group of smokers into attending a public prayer, then locked the gates and burned the building. Likely apocryphal, but a favorite among street storytellers. Back in the plaza, a dog barks. You shiver, not from cold, but from the realization that you're walking through a city where a drink could get you killed. And yet, despite the terror, the coffee never stopped flowing. Why? Because humans are weird. We fall in love with rituals. The clink of cups, the warmth of liquid, the brief illusion of clarity caffeine gives us. We know the risks, but we crave the comfort. And sometimes, we rebel not with swords, but with sips. So, even now, under the nose of an emperor known for silent executions and sudden raids, the people of Istanbul found ways to brew, to gather, to remember who they were. You step away from the plaza and hear it again, that familiar grinding sound echoing from a distant corner. It's quieter now, more careful, but unmistakable. Coffee lives, even under tyranny, even in fear, especially then. You follow the scent now, just the faintest ghost of roasted beans, down a twisting alley that coils like a question mark. It's darker here, the stones beneath your feet slick with evening condensation, the lanterns fewer and farther between. But the path is clear enough. Because where there's coffee, there's always someone willing to risk everything to keep it alive. Back in Murad IV's time, the Ottoman Empire was massive, vast enough that a ban in Istanbul didn't mean universal compliance. Far-flung provinces, distant cities, lonely mountain passes, all became havens for the bean. It's here, in the shadows of empire, that coffee became more than a beverage. It became a symbol, and symbols, well, they tend to be stubborn. Take, for example, the caravans of Yemen. Hundreds of miles south, long before the bans, coffee had already rooted itself in Sufi culture. The dervishes drank it to stay awake through long nights of chanting, spinning, and divine longing. For them, coffee wasn't indulgence. It was a tool for worship. Sacred, almost holy. So when news reached them that the Sultan had outlawed it, the reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. Outlawing coffee? They might have said, probably between gulps. What's next? Outlawing bread? Air? But Istanbul's ban had consequences far beyond the capital. Traders grew wary. Shipments slowed. Prices spiked. And suddenly, a drink that had once been abundant began to feel like contraband. You picture a merchant now, a wiry man with sunburnt skin, guiding his camel caravan through rocky terrain. Hidden among the spices and textiles is a single sack of coffee beans, double-wrapped in goat hide and tucked beneath layers of frankincense. The risk is enormous, but the reward even greater. In Istanbul, coffee isn't just a luxury, it's a statement. Historians still argue whether this coffee smuggling boom truly existed or is just romantic embellishment. But records do show a suspicious number of spice caravans being randomly inspected around this time, and more than a few governors mysteriously demoted after letting a little too much cargo pass unchecked. Meanwhile, underground cafes began to sprout like mushrooms after rain. Not official ones, not even permanent ones. These were movable feasts of caffeine and defiance. A back room one night, a garden shed the next. Customers whispered invitations through door cracks, passed notes folded like origami, knocked 3 times and twice again. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, but electric. Picture it, the flicker of lamplight on ceramic cups, hands trembling not from the caffeine but from adrenaline. One ear always tilted toward the door. Conversations hushed, but never dull. Maybe you'd hear a poem recited beneath a breath. Maybe someone would sketch out a political cartoon in the condensation on the wall. Or maybe, just maybe, you'd catch the beginning of a rebellion murmured into the steam. One mainstream fact: coffee houses had become such powerful cultural institutions by this time that they were often considered the schools of the poor, a place where news spread, literacy grew, and politics thrived. That's precisely why Murad IV feared them. One fringe detail: there are tales of women disguising themselves as male servers just to gain entry into these all-male spaces. Not for love, not for money, but simply to drink in the conversation and the caffeine. But mostly, the conversation. You round a corner now, and the alley opens into a small courtyard, the kind of place where secret gatherings might once have occurred. You half expect a voice to call out a password. Instead, it's silent. The kind of silence that presses gently against your temples and tells you, be still, listen. The ghosts here aren't noisy. They sip slowly, lean in, and nod. In your imagination, someone lifts a pot of chesve over coals. The bubbles rise slowly, the thick, dark liquid almost humming. The smell, rich and sweet with a hint of danger, wafts upward. This isn't just coffee, it's communion. And yet, even as the underground thrived, the empire above it did not. Murad IV was not a ruler interested in balance. His bans were absolute, his punishments legendary. He ruled by fear, and fear works, until it doesn't. The more he cracked down, the more people resisted, quietly, cleverly, relentlessly. Remember that merchant caravan? Imagine a cup from that journey making its way to a secret cafe in the old city. Imagine a young scholar sipping it, mind racing with ideas. Imagine him penning something revolutionary, inspired not just by caffeine, but by the very act of drinking it. Ideas are like beans, after all. They grow best when buried. You lean against the cool wall of the courtyard and think about how empires often fall, not through battles, but through boredom. The kind of systemic fatigue that sets in when even simple joys are outlawed. When every smile must be measured. When every flavor must be bland. Coffee was joy, unscripted, bittersweet. It was something people could choose for themselves, and that, in the end, was the true threat. Sultan Murad IV didn't fear the drink. He feared the decisions that followed. The thoughts it sparked, the meetings it hosted, the laughter it refused to silence. In your ears now, the sound returns, the grinding, the pouring, the clink of ceramic. You smile, because you know what Murad IV never could fully destroy. The ritual lives. In every hidden room, every stolen sip, every secret cafe that dared to exist simply because someone needed that taste. And tonight, here, in this courtyard, real or imagined, you're part of that lineage. A rebel, quietly sipping against the laws of a long-dead sultan. The night deepens around you, the courtyard folding in like a warm blanket. Somewhere in the shadows, you hear the faint clink of a chesve lid, as if someone, past or present, is still preparing a brew under the cover of silence. But your journey, doesn't stop here. Coffee, as you're beginning to see, was never just a drink. It was a pulse that ran through an empire, defying control. You step away from the courtyard now, through a narrow door that seems to remember more than it should. As it creaks closed behind you, you find yourself inside a space that feels both intimate and infinite. A place where stories echo through arched ceilings and time folds like fabric. Here, you begin to understand what really terrified Murad IV. He wasn't afraid of coffee itself, those roasted little beans or the frothy cups served in delicate finjans. No, he was afraid of what happened after the first sip, of how the mind wakes, of what people dare to say when the world is a little more alert, a little less obedient. This brings you to a curious detail, perhaps your favorite so far. During the ban, Ottoman officials sometimes tried to sniff out illicit cafes by walking the streets at night and listening for slurping. Yes, you heard that right. These officers, draped in robes and carrying torches, would literally tiptoe through alleyways, heads cocked, trying to detect the soft, reverent sip of forbidden Java. You imagine one now, tall hat, pointy mustache, leaning dramatically against a window to confirm that yes, someone inside just exhaled a satisfied ah. Cue the raid. Historians still argue whether this method was effective or completely ridiculous. Some say the slurping patrols were just exaggerated satire from contemporary writers. Others insist they really happened, adding yet another absurd factor to this caffeinated crackdown. Meanwhile, the cafe's adapted. You pass through the next room now, your fingers trailing over the curved wood of an old counter, the grain smooth from 1,000 palms. This was a place of invention, not just resistance. If the Empire was going to outlaw sound, well, then the cafes would serve thicker brews, drinkable with minimal slurp. They'd play instruments louder. They'd mix in tobacco smoke, spices, even music, anything to mask the scent or steam. One clever cafe reportedly disguised its drinks as medicine. Patrons walked in looking solemn, received their treatment, and walked out with a spring in their step. Was it real? Maybe. Or maybe it's just another example of how myth and mocha swirl together. But the crackdown wasn't just about breaking cups and closing doors. It got darker. Murad IV created a special enforcement unit, men who were said to operate like a shadow within the state. Dressed in plain clothes, they'd pose as customers, sit in silence, and wait. And when the time was right, they'd strike. Some were brutal, others theatrical. One story tells of an officer who, after identifying an underground cafe, drew his sword, sliced open every coffee sack in the room, and lit them on fire while reciting verses from the Quran. Did that really happen? Maybe. Maybe not. But imagine the smell, bittersweet and tragic. Roasted beans turning to ash on marble floors. Still, coffee culture didn't vanish. It evolved. In wealthier homes, private coffee salons sprang up. Intimate spaces where trusted friends and family gathered for poetry, conversation, and the occasional stealthy brew. Women barred from most public cafes created their own rituals. They'd brew in ornate sets, infuse cardamom, and turn coffee service into high art. Their gatherings became vital, places where gossip, politics, and matchmaking intertwined. Behind closed doors, in silk robes and slippers, they created a subculture as rich as the drink itself, and perhaps the most rebellious of all, the poets. You pause in front of a wall covered in delicate script. Ottoman Turkish, impossibly curvy, like vines or smoke. Some verses praise love, others mourn time. But sprinkled among them are cheeky metaphors for coffee, calling it the black river of clarity, the tongue's second candle, and the wine of the wise. These weren't just pretty words, they were coded defiance, because while wine was haram, forbidden by Islamic law, coffee floated in the gray zone, and when Murad IV banned it, poets leaned into the irony. They treated coffee like forbidden fruit, giving it all the eroticism and mystery of something sinful. One mainstream fact: Ottoman poetry and miniatures from this era often include references to coffee as a metaphor for forbidden desire or spiritual awakening. One fringe tidbit: a few scholars believe entire love poems from this period were secretly about coffee. When they say, Your lips taste like the dark spring. They don't mean a person. They mean the morning brew, which honestly might be more romantic. As you pass into the next chamber, the scent returns. That roasted edge laced with something floral. You close your eyes and sip, just once. The warmth spreads through your chest, your shoulders, your thoughts. And for a moment you understand what it meant to drink this during a ban. It wasn't about caffeine, it was about being awake. You exhale slowly, letting the imagined warmth of that forbidden cup seep down your spine like honey. The quiet room around you flickers in and out of shadow, a place suspended between centuries. And now you move forward, deeper into the tangled web of resistance and rebellion, guided by the smell of roasted beans and the whispers of the past. The Ottomans, for all their pomp and discipline, were nothing if not resourceful. As the imperial boot pressed harder, the people's ingenuity pressed back with equal force. Coffee, it turned out, had become too deeply woven into the empire's tapestry to be unpicked without a fight. And so, fight they did, but not with swords. With stories, disguises, and a little theatrical flair. You find yourself now in a narrow alleyway, moonlight puddling between your feet. The scent of coffee wafts from a shuttered window, but it's not from a cafe. It's from a barber shop. Yes, a barber shop. During the crackdown, many small-time coffee vendors rebranded themselves as barbers or herbalists. The tools of their trade lay visibly on counters: combs, shears, pots of wax. But tucked behind the curtain, behind a wall panel, or beneath the tiled floor, were the real prizes: copper coffee sets, mortar and pestle for fresh grinding, maybe even a musician or two plucking a lute softly in the corner. You imagine it now, slipping behind the curtain under the pretense of a shave, only to be offered a steaming cup with a conspiratorial wink. You sip. The bitter darkness coats your tongue, and suddenly the world feels a bit more alive again. Historians still argue whether these underground cafes were common or more the stuff of legend. Some accounts seem romanticized, tales spun by 19th century Western travelers eager to imagine a Middle East of veils and secrets. But others point to tax records and seized property lists that suggest a vast shadow economy fueled by caffeine. Now let's talk about one of the more surprising players in this history, the Janissaries. Yes, the elite soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, the famed warrior class who began as enslaved Christian boys and rose to become the muscle behind the Sultanate. You'd think they'd follow imperial law to the letter, but no. These guys? Huge fans of coffee. In fact, coffee houses were often their domain, gathering spots where off-duty Janissaries would swap stories, smoke pipes, and debate politics. Some even ran cafes themselves, which of course made Murad IV's ban especially awkward. How do you enforce a prohibition when your own enforcers are slurping cappuccinos behind your back? One mainstream historical fact. Many of the early Ottoman coffee houses were operated or protected by Janissaries. They were social, cultural, and even military hubs. Part barracks, part Starbucks. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Janissaries reportedly used their cafes to stage puppet shows, yes, literal hand puppets, where they'd mock court officials, poke fun at religious authorities, and satirize Murad himself. These weren't just harmless entertainment. They were subversive little revolutions, performed in flickering torchlight and followed by nervous laughter. You can picture one now. Two felt characters with oversized turbans bickering over coffee prices while dropping thinly veiled jabs at palace corruption. The audience chuckles, but outside, the guards listen. And yes, some performances were busted, puppets confiscated, stages dismantled. But not all. Which brings us to the heart of why coffee kept surviving. It had allies in the unlikeliest places. Even within the palace, not everyone was on board with Murad's puritanical crusade. His mother, Kosem Sultan, a political powerhouse in her own right, was rumored to enjoy her coffee behind closed curtains. Servants whispered of trays carried discreetly through hidden corridors, the clink of porcelain echoing just a bit too long. One tale, unconfirmed but delightful, says Kosem once offered Murad a cup of herbal tea during a tense meeting. He drank it, calmed down noticeably, And only then did she tell him it had been laced with a touch of roasted bean. Her point made, she sipped from her own cup and smiled. Whether this happened or not, you feel it, the tension between law and life. The ruler and the ruled, the cup and the hand that raises it. Because in the end, this wasn't just about coffee, it was about power. Who controls what goes into your body? Who decides what pleasures are dangerous? And how do ordinary people fight back when the fight is over something so small, so simple, and yet so deeply symbolic? You move now into a quieter space. Dimly lit, soft carpet underfoot. A small coffee tray sits abandoned on a table. The dregs have dried into lacework, a forgotten moment, fossilized. In porcelain, you trace it with your eyes and wonder how many sips like this carried unspoken resistance. How many half-empty cups were emptied too soon, the sound of boots at the door shattering the ritual mid-pour. And yet, the drink endured, even in exile, even in hiding, even when punished. That's the power of ritual. That's the power of a good cup. The alley behind you fades, the scent of secret brewing trailing like a ribbon on the breeze. You walk onward, the city quiet, but never sleeping. Even under repression, Istanbul pulses with stories of defiance, adaptation, and compromise. And, as you follow this thread, you come to understand something crucial. Murad IV wasn't just at war with a drink. He was at war with a culture. But coffee didn't vanish. It evolved. After the initial shock of enforcement, people got creative. They didn't just disguise coffee houses. They reshaped them. Some became private salons, hidden behind the facade of a bathhouse or a tailor's shop. You'd enter through a side door, give a password, and find yourself in a lush, candle-lit room filled with cushions, poetry, and, yes, coffee. Others adapted their recipes, disguising the smell and presentation. A thick clove tea, heavily spiced, could pass in dim light. Honeyed dates might hide a roasted bean or two. Roasting methods grew subtler, even quieter. People discovered they could do it slowly, in buried pots, using residual coals. The result? A smoother, smokier brew, and a lower chance of getting caught. Historians still argue whether this adaptation was widespread or reserved for the upper classes. Some suggest only the elite could afford such elaborate subterfuge. Others point to folktales and kitchen manuals that mention rural methods for clandestine brewing, an indication that even commoners found ways to keep the ritual alive. And then there's the sensory detail. Imagine sipping a cup that's been brewed underground, heated not over flame but beneath clay and sand. It's quiet, earthy. The taste is softer, like history itself has been filtered into the grounds. Your quirky tidbit for this stretch. In some cases, people literally buried their coffee supplies in graveyards. Why? Because palace guards were less likely to search sacred grounds. A stretch of tombstones became, ironically, a safe haven for contraband beans. It's here, perhaps, that the spiritual side of the coffee ritual begins to surface more clearly. In a time of fear, it wasn't just about stimulation anymore. It was about connection. To the self, to the past, to something larger than the rules imposed by a throne. You pause now in one of those graveyards. Stones lean and whisper. A breeze tugs your collar. Beneath your feet, a shallow cache of clay jars nestles between tree roots. You don't disturb them, but you imagine lifting the lid, finding beans wrapped in linen, still fragrant after all this time. From here, the story opens wider. The borders of the empire ripple. Because if Murad couldn't fully ban coffee in Istanbul, imagine trying to enforce it across thousands of miles of territory. And that's where the cracks really began to show. In Egypt, for instance, coffee had been embraced earlier than in Istanbul. Sufi mystics in Cairo and Mecca used it to stay awake during long night prayers, seeing it as a spiritual aid. Their traditions ran deep. And while Murad's decree technically applied to the whole empire, local governors weren't always eager to enforce it, especially when they themselves were regular patrons. So in many provinces, the ban was more theater than practice. A nod to imperial authority, followed by a wink. Coffee continued to pour, sometimes publicly, sometimes just out of sight. Even in Baghdad and Aleppo, two major Ottoman cities, the coffee houses never fully disappeared. They just changed form. This decentralization frustrated Murad. Sent envoys, fired local officials, even ordered brutal punishments for non-compliance. But distance dilutes control. And in those border regions, something fascinating happened. Coffee culture fused with local traditions. One mainstream historical fact here: coffee spread outward from Yemen and Ethiopia. But its cultural evolution truly exploded in the Ottoman fringes, where Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and European influences collided. In Aleppo, for example, cafes became centers of trade gossip. In Sarajevo, they were tied to music. In Damascus, coffee houses became open-air theaters for folk storytelling. Each city added something Murad couldn't erase. And now you're seated at a wooden table in one of those cafes, perhaps in Damascus. A storyteller sits before you, voice low, hands painting images in the air. The tale he tells isn't about warriors or princes. It's about a man who hides his soul in a coffee bean and must journey across deserts to find it again. You smile. The allegory is thinly veiled. The meaning, impossible to miss. But what Murad IV didn't understand, what perhaps no autocrat ever fully grasps, is that culture isn't a lamp you can simply snuff out. It adapts. It embeds itself. And sometimes it grows stronger under pressure. Even within Istanbul itself, new forms of expression began to appear. Coffee was gone. But not conversation. People turned to poetry, shadow puppetry, and even calligraphy to express what had been lost. One artist, a calligrapher named Hafiz Selim, famously etched an entire ode to coffee onto a single grain of rice, microscopic rebellion at its finest. And yes, that's your quirky fact for this section. Rice grain calligraphy was a legit Ottoman art form. A message the size of your pinky nail could hold volumes if you had the patience and the ink. As the years wore on, the pressure mounted, but so did the resistance. Even palace guards grew weary of enforcement. Some began accepting bribes. Others turned a blind eye entirely. Murad may have held the throne, but in the end, it was clear. He could not hold the cup. You lean back now, imagining the quiet defiance of 1,000 hands lifting 1,000 hidden mugs. The empire buzzes, not with battle, but with whispers, with stories. The sun is low now, throwing long shadows across cobblestone streets that have memorized thousands of footsteps, some nervous, some defiant. You drift through time like a quiet observer, letting the city of Istanbul wrap you in its uneasy calm. Behind shuttered doors, the aroma of roasted beans still clings to the air, mingled with the ever-present salt of the Bosphorus breeze. Tonight, your journey takes a curious detour, from secret cellars and smoky courtyards to the one place Murad IV believed he could control everything, the palace itself. You're now inside Topkapi Palace. Yes, the very seat of the Sultan's power. But you're not walking the polished marble halls of officialdom. You're moving through the shadows, following the quiet shuffle of slippers on tiled floors. Behind silken curtains and golden screens, even here, coffee survives. You wouldn't think it. After all, Murad IV issued some of the most draconian edicts of his reign from these very rooms. He read intelligence reports about illegal brewers while sipping rosewater. He paced the courtyards, planning raids and executions, convinced that coffee houses were nests of sedition and satire. He feared their laughter more than he feared the sword. But historians still argue whether the ban extended to every chamber of the palace. There are whispered records of concubines enjoying secret cups in the harem, of eunuchs who smuggled roasted beans in hollowed-out melon shells, even of scribes in the archives, eyes blurry from candlelight, warming their hands on tiny porcelain cups. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Topkapi had an entire wing devoted to kitchens. The imperial kitchens employed hundreds of staff, many of whom came from the Balkans, the Caucasus, and North Africa, regions where coffee culture had already taken root. It's entirely plausible that brewing happened behind closed copper doors. Even if Murad issued punishments for the same, you reach a hidden corridor now. The stones are cool underfoot, the air thick with cardamom and old parchment. Ahead, a figure stands, an old woman in palace garb, her face lined with years and secrets. She nods without speaking, turns, and leads you into a chamber lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp. On a table, a steaming chesve, a small porcelain cup. No words exchanged, just the soft clink of ceramic, the swirling surface of a forbidden drink. You sip. It's thick, slightly bitter, with a smoky sweetness that coats your tongue. And in that moment, you realize something odd. This is Murad IV's palace. But even here, under his iron rule, the coffee continues to flow. The emperor himself, cloaked in paranoia and authority, would probably never know. Or maybe he knew and chose not to see. After all, total control is an illusion, even for a sultan. Now here's a fringe tidbit. Rumors swirled that Murad IV's mother, Kosum Sultan, a woman of enormous political influence, enjoyed coffee in her private chambers. If true, then imagine the contradiction. The enforcer of the empire's most notorious ban had it brewing in his own family. Some say it was Kosum who softened Murad's more extreme impulses. Others claim she pushed him toward absolutism. Historians still argue over her role in the empire's inner politics. Was she the puppet master behind the ban? Or was she simply sipping quietly in defiance? You wander deeper into the palace. The luxury fades. Pass through servant quarters, archives, storage rooms lined with velvet sacks. Some smell faintly of cloves and cinnamon. Others, unmistakably, of roasted beans. Everywhere you look, the tension between decree and desire, between power and pleasure. One tale sticks with you. A court musician who composed a lullaby so soothing it was rumored to mimic the mental clarity of post-coffee. Reflection. It was banned, too, briefly, before returning as an instrumental piece at banquets. Nobody dared link it to coffee again, but the meaning hung in the air. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some palace servants reportedly trained nightingales to mimic the clink of a coffee spoon in a porcelain cup, a tiny rebellion. A reminder that even the smallest sounds could carry meaning in a world where words were dangerous. You pause now in the Sultan's personal library. Thousands of volumes, bound in leather, inscribed in gold. A room meant for wisdom, but often filled with silence. Murad IV, it said, occasionally read here, though more often, he summoned others to read to him. His eyesight suffered in later years, and his temper didn't help. You imagine him pacing, restless, reading about Aristotle in one breath and sentencing someone for coffee in the next. A man caught between legacy and obsession, between empire and insecurity. And as you turn to leave the library, you find something strange tucked between two dusty volumes, a poem, handwritten, unsigned, ink faded with time. But the lines are clear. Dark as night, yet light it brings from bitter cup, the soul takes wings. Though tyrants ban and guards may pry, in silent sips we still defy. Yingqiu. Smile. The rebellion was never loud. It didn't wear armor or raise banners. It brewed quietly, waited patiently, and outlived the decree. Because even within the palace, the heart of the ban, the spirit of coffee remained. And now you step out of Topkapi's shadows, back into the city's gentle night. Lanterns sway. Overhead, a child giggles in an alley. The scent of roasting beans dances through the air once more, carried not by permission, but by persistence. The streets of Istanbul hum softly beneath your feet. The sounds of evening are gentle now. Brass bells jingling on donkey carts, a lullaby drifting from a high window. The low, steady chime of the mosque clock tower marking another hour past. But don't be fooled by the quiet. The Sultan's ban may have begun in the palace, but the real battle brewed in the streets, particularly in the tea houses, alley cafes, and clandestine dens of conversation where the scent of rebellion came roasted, ground and steeped. Tonight you slip into one of these places, not through the front, of course. The front has been boarded up since last month's raid. Instead, you duck behind a linen stall, down a staircase cut into stone, and through a curtain that smells faintly of smoke and cardamom. Welcome to the underground coffee culture of 17th century Istanbul. The space is cramped, lit by a single oil lamp swinging slightly with every breath of the city above. Around you, men and women gather in soft conversation. Not loud, never loud, but warm. Laughter is muffled, but unmistakable. And that smell, oh, that smell. Toasted beans, sweet resin, tobacco, citrus. You'd know it anywhere. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even during the strictest years of Murad IV's coffee ban, underground coffee houses flourished. Though punishable by beatings or death, these establishments, known in hushed tones as kaçak kahvehaneler or illegal coffee houses, popped up across the city, often doubling as secret meeting places for poets, political dissidents, and weary merchants seeking reprieve. You find yourself seated on a faded cushion, the floor cool beneath your legs. A young boy, maybe 12, delivers a brass tray with 2 small cups and a dish of candied figs. No one asks your name, no one questions your presence. If you're here, it's assumed you understand the risk and the comfort. Across from you, an old man with a beard like curled parchment clears his throat. He recites a riddle. Another chuckles, counters with a pun so sharp it makes someone snort into their cup. The conversation flows like steam from the sesvi, fluid, fragrant, inevitable. This is the heart of defiance, but it's not loud defiance. Not torches and mobs, just people refusing to give up something that made their lives feel alive. Historians still argue whether these coffee houses truly threatened the state. Some suggest they were hotbeds of sedition, spreading anti-government satire through coded songs and wordplay. Others believe they were simply spaces where people could feel human again, where the empire's growing weight lifted, just slightly, with every sip. Now for a quirky fringe tidbit, some coffeehouse owners developed elaborate systems of coffee signals, like pirate flags, but with beans. A pouch of green beans hung upside down on a laundry line meant a fresh roast had just arrived. A candle in a clay bowl placed by a shuttered window meant the coast was clear and brewing had begun. These signs were subtle but sacred, like the rhythm of footsteps you instinctively memorize walking a familiar staircase in the dark. Back in your corner of the underground cafe, you're handed a small wooden token. A simple thing, about the size of a coin, carved with a tulip on one side and a crescent on the other. It's a membership marker, a way of saying, you're welcome here, and perhaps more importantly, you believe in something. The owner, a woman with streaks of silver in her hair and calloused fingers from years of grinding beans, tells you her story. Her great-grandfather opened a public bathhouse. Her father transformed it into a tea salon, and when she inherited it, she turned it into a haven for those who needed coffee more than comfort. I've seen empires crumble, she says, pouring another cup. But the warmth of a drink shared between 2 strangers, that's eternal. And again, the world narrows to the rim of your porcelain cup. The gentle bitterness, the echo of clinking spoons and soft sighs. But danger never truly sleeps. You hear a distant whistle, short, sharp, 3 quick bursts. The back wall of the cafe shifts. People begin to rise, not panicked, but practiced. The token is slipped back into your hand. You follow a winding tunnel lit by faint lanterns until the scent of earth gives way to the salt air of the port. And there it is. The Bosphorus, dark and shimmering. Fishermen haul nets. A cat slinks across the dock. You're no longer just someone curious about the ban. You're part of the quiet resistance now. You pass a man with a shoulder sack. Something clinks inside. Metal? Glass? No. You know that sound now. It's a sesve, brass, slightly dented. The man gives you a knowing nod and disappears into the fog. That brings us to one of the strangest consequences of Murad's coffee crackdown. The rise of the wandering brewers. Men and women who traveled with makeshift kits, portable, grinders, hidden pots, collapsible cups, and served coffee on the move. One sip here, one story there. They became legends and whispers. The bean gypsies of Istanbul. And now, here you are. The Sultan forbids it. The guards chase it. But you hold the aftertaste of roasted defiance on your tongue, the memory of a place where rebellion smelled like cinnamon and hope. As the night deepens, the city quiets again. But not you. Your eyes remain open, not with fear, but with fascination. You've just tasted a forbidden brew shared by poets, rebels, and dreamers. And something tells you, this fight isn't over yet. The morning sun bleeds gold across the Bosphorus as you find yourself drifting through the busy docks. You've spent the night evading royal patrols and slipping through alleyways sticky with last night's spices and secrets. But now, Istanbul is awake again. Traders unloading carts, gulls shrieking, and smoke curling upward from hidden stoves warming the first pots of the day's forbidden drink. Welcome to the trade underworld of 17th century coffee, the bean black market. You duck into the shadow of a fruit cart and watch two men haggle not over figs but sacks. Small, heavy, cloth-wrapped, labeled as dried apricots, but you've seen the signs. The way the seller thumbs the string twice before handing it off, the tiny coffee bean stitched into the corner seam. This isn't about fruit, mainstream. Historical fact. Despite Sultan Murad IV's strict prohibition, the coffee trade never really stopped. In fact, it thrived. Merchants relabeled coffee shipments as spices, textiles, even religious artifacts. Ships coming from Yemen or Ethiopia often carried hidden compartments filled with green beans, sometimes packed into ceramic jars that once held olive oil. Disguised cargoes that fooled all but the most thorough inspectors. As you tail a cart, loaded with such olive jars toward a warehouse near Galata, you start to see the scope of it all. Smugglers, porters, scribes who adjusted shipment records. There was a whole economy built on coffee. It was more than beverage. It was currency, power, and pleasure bundled in one bitter little bean. And the stakes? Sky high. Punishments were brutal. Traders caught trafficking coffee could be publicly whipped or, worse, executed. But still, they came. Arab merchants with their rich mocha roasts, Persian brokers offering sweet spiced varieties, and Ottoman traders running double ledgers. One for the palace, one for the people. Historians still argue whether Murad's crackdown was ever about coffee at all. Some suggest it was a convenient scapegoat, an easy symbol of excess during a time of internal strife. Others point to his personal traumas, including the traumatic loss of his brother, as fuel for his drive toward authoritarian control. Either way, the coffee bans only added gasoline to the empire's already boiling unrest. Now here's your fringe fact of the night. Smugglers used pigeons to relay encrypted coffee drop times and locations. No, really. Tiny scrolls tied to legs, in code, just like spy movies, but with birds and beans instead of microchips. One document uncovered in Cairo hints at a pigeon route running from Damascus to Istanbul, timed perfectly with known ship arrivals. You follow a smuggler now. He moves quickly but confidently, with a worn leather satchel bouncing at his hip. He doesn't speak, but gestures for you to keep your distance. You wind through the crooked streets of Karaköy, your shoes crunching on pebble and ash. At the back of an abandoned bathhouse, he knocks twice, pauses, knocks again. The door creaks open. Inside, a storage room filled wall to wall with sacks. Some split open to reveal the green shimmer of unroasted coffee. Others are being weighed, measured, and passed to couriers. One man, shirtless, with inked forearms, writes, in a ledger that looks older than the empire itself. The room smells of cloves, dust, and money. A woman in a deep blue caftan offers you a taste. It's not brewed the way you're used to. This is coffee syrup, thick, spiced, concentrated. For traveling, she explains. Just add water and fire. You dip a finger. Sweet, bitter, smoky, like molasses and burnt almond. It kicks like a mule and leaves your tongue tingling. That's Yemeni, she says, smuggled in a flour sack. The guard even thanked us for the bread. You chuckle. She doesn't. This isn't a game, she says, eyes suddenly sharp. People die for this. Silence falls. It's easy to forget sometimes that the very thing you sip for comfort was once enough to get a head chopped off. That something as soft as steam rising from a cup could once have meant war, or love, or life. And in some corners of the empire, coffee meant all three. The smuggler hands you a sealed jar. You don't know why. Maybe he trusts you. Maybe you're part of the route now. He points toward the docks again. "You deliver," he says. "House with the red curtain. Knock 4 times." And just like that, part of the system. Walking now through the morning haze, you feel a strange kind of pride. Not for breaking rules, but for being tethered, however briefly, to a community of people who cared about something deeply, enough to risk everything for it. They say revolutions start in whispers, and here, those whispers tasted like roasted hope and smelled faintly of cardamom. Before you reach the house with the red curtain, you pause. The jar is still warm in your hand. You turn it once, twice, and swear you hear beans rattling inside. Funny how something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could upend an empire, birth black markets, spark poetry, and forge secret brotherhoods in smoky rooms. And yet here you are, carrying it like contraband, feeling its weight like truth. Knock, 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 knock. The door opens. A hand reaches out. No words, just trust and coffee. The door swings shut behind you, leaving only a sliver of daylight and the soft hush of secrecy. You're ushered inside, a narrow hallway, stone walls lined with faded carpets, and the smell of something floral clinging faintly to the air. Your feet move instinctively over worn tiles, following the flicker of lantern light and the rustle of the robe ahead of you. You've entered what you later learn is known only as the chamber. This isn't just a delivery point. It's a gathering place, a haven, a microcosm of defiance woven through sips and whispers. You step into a dim room where 10, maybe 12 people lounge on cushions. There's laughter here, low and soft like velvet, and music, a reed flute winding its way between clinks of porcelain and the occasional pop of burning coals. Tonight you've stumbled into a secret salon, mainstream historical fact. When Sultan Murad IV outlawed coffee, he didn't just target cafes. He targeted entire modes of gathering, spaces where people read poetry, debated politics, and exchanged ideas. Coffee houses, or kave-khane, were cultural incubators. And in banning them, Murad inadvertently drove the intellectual elite underground. Man leans forward and asks, without raising his voice, "What is the nature of freedom if the tongue cannot dance?" His Turkish is old and formal, and yet the meaning hits you like warm tea on a cold morning. Another replies with a quote from Rumi, and someone else claps softly in approval. This isn't rebellion with torches. It's revolution by conversation. The jar you carried is opened here with quiet reverence. The beans are poured into a brass grinder, a slow rhythmic cranking that fills the room with scent and anticipation. A boy no older than 16 tends to the sezve, the long-handled pot over hot sand. He stirs it with the solemnity of a monk performing a ritual. As the brew bubbles and foams, cups are passed around. Yours arrives steaming, fragrant, slightly bitter. No sugar, just the truth. You sip, and in that moment, something ancient and collective unfolds within you, like you're drinking not just coffee, but shared defiance, hidden joy, and the endurance of those who simply refuse to be silenced. Fringe historical tidbit. Some hidden coffee gatherings, especially in wealthier homes, used coded poetry to test new guests. If you answered a question with a verse referencing a banned writer, you were accepted. If you hesitated or gave a state-sanctioned answer, well, let's just say your invitation was never renewed. Tonight, a veiled woman recites a piece many attribute to Nefi, a satirical poet who danced one step too close to Murad's fury and lost his life for it. Her delivery is unhurried, her eyes fierce. Let the tyrant pour laws from his lips. I pour ink from mine. The room hums with quiet agreement. You glance at others. Some nod, some close their eyes. One man bites his lip until it nearly bleeds. Historians still argue whether these hidden gatherings were effective resistance or merely escapism. Did they change anything? Did they fuel the fire of reform, or simply offer a dream-shaped distraction while the empire tightened its grip? But here's the truth. Every empire fears what it cannot see. And here, in the half-light, people are seeing each other. You notice the walls, lined not just with tapestries, but with books, handwritten manuscripts, banned epics, A few scrolls, bare seals you recognize from official archives. These were stolen or preserved. Depends on how you look at it. A girl no older than 9 passes you a bowl of dates and whispers, "We have coffee from Cairo next week." She winks, and it's then you realize, this is generational. This is a seed planted deep. Later that night, the conversations wind down. People lean against each other. Flute is quieter now. Some couples hold hands under the folds of their shawls. Others sit alone, their eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling. You watch the final cups poured, thick sediment gathering at the bottom. Fortune tellers later read from these grounds, you recall. Sip your fate, then see it in the dregs. You finish yours, and someone takes your cup. The woman who recited earlier holds it up to the lantern, turns it slowly, then begins to smile. "You," she says, "will cross many gates." You laugh, unsure what that even means. But it feels true. And just like that, the chamber begins to empty. One by one, the guests slip out, some through back doors, others cloaked under the stars. You step outside and find the city still humming with secret life. And as you walk home, you notice something strange on doorsteps, tucked in windowsills, chalk marks, some shaped like beans, others like crescent moons. Quiet signs. A whole city mapping its own quiet resistance, in code only the caffeinated could crack. You pass a boy sweeping a step and whisper, "The moon is full tonight." He pauses. "And the beans are ripe." You nod. Another code confirmed. And just before dawn, as you reach your resting place, you turn to the east and see it. That first sliver of light glinting over the domes of Istanbul. Not firelight, not lightning. Hope. You wake late the next day, if you can call it that. The sun is high and harsh through narrow windows, casting sharp patterns across the floorboards. Your mouth is dry with the lingering tang of last night's brew, and your fingers smell faintly of spice, ink, and a little smoke. As you rise and gather yourself, the city outside feels different, more alert. The street below is alive with wheelbarrows rattling over stones, vendors shouting about fresh figs and silks, and someone, somewhere, tuning a saz. Istanbul continues, as it always does. But then you hear it. A strange hush, a brief pause in the flow of morning. You glance down and notice that same street boy from before. His eyes scan the rooftops, the alleys. He whistles a 3-note pattern and then vanishes into a stairwell. Moments later, another young woman does the same, slips into a bathhouse entrance and disappears. Something's up. Mainstream historical. Fact: Sultan Murad IV's regime was not just known for its strict enforcement of bans, it was famous, or infamous, for his personal patrols. Disguised in plain clothes, Murad himself was said to wander the streets of Istanbul at night, sniffing out lawbreakers, drinkers, gamblers, coffee drinkers. Yes, he was that hands-on. You head down into the city, moving cautiously. Today, something crackles in the air. No vendors brew coffee out in the open. No rich aromas curl from doorways. The air smells like damp fabric and nervous sweat. As you pass a tea shop, you hear the owner mutter to a customer, "Lock it down. There's talk of a raid tonight." Fringe historical tidbit. During Murad's purges, even the act of owning coffee utensils like a kesve or grinder was considered circumstantial evidence. People buried their gear in gardens, passed it off as spice tools, or melted brass pots down into shapeless lumps to avoid suspicion. You duck into a small apothecary, pretending to browse for dried rose petals. The shopkeeper, an old man with a glass eye and perfect posture, gives you a once-over and whispers, "If you still have beans, finish them, or trade them away. Tonight will be loud." Historians still argue whether Murad's personal involvement in patrols is exaggerated. Could a sultan really have disguised himself and hunted down civilians night after night? Some say it's legend. Others claim there are documented arrests with his signature, made on the very nights these tales describe. What is certain is that fear worked. As twilight falls, the streets become eerily quiet. Windows shutter early, lamps are doused, but you, You still have that last handful of beans from the Cairo stash. So you head to the hammam basement again. The candle at the entrance flickers 3 times, on purpose. A signal. Inside, the chamber is quieter tonight. No music, no children. Just 8 people, all older, their eyes flicking toward the door each time it creaks. Someone places your beans into the grinder. The boy from last time is absent. A man with a scar along his jaw takes his place, grinding too quickly, as if speed will save him from something. Tonight, the brew is served in silence. No poetry, no laughter. Just a gathering of souls determined to not give in, even if their hands shake slightly as they sip. You don't speak, you just drink. It is bitterer than usual. A woman in a crimson scarf leans in close and whispers, "They took Kamal this morning. He was found with a sack of grounds." You nod, eyes down. You'd met Kamal once. He told terrible jokes, made great baklava. Outside, footsteps echo against the alley wall. Too many, too loud, and too intentional. Everyone freezes. The chesve is yanked from the fire. Ashes scatter. One man kicks a hidden panel open in the floor. Inside, a hollow space barely big enough for 2. You don't even argue. You slide in and hold your breath as the panel closes above. Moments later, the door slams open. Boots, cloaks, steel. You can't see it, but you hear it. The gruff voices, the harsh questions, the sound of books hitting the floor. Where is it? No idea what you mean. I smell it. A crash. Someone gasps. Then, the sound of something being poured out. Beans? Brew? You don't know, but it feels like the soul of the city is being emptied, drip by drip. You hold still, even as dust settles in your nostrils. Your back aches. Your breath is shallow. Eventually, the footsteps recede. The silence returns, heavier than before. It takes a full hour before the panel is lifted. The man who helps you out says nothing, just pats your back once and hands you a cup of cold water. You all sit there, breathing. No one speaks of what's been lost. It's too soon. But the woman in the scarf finally whispers, "This won't last." You ask, "What do you mean?" She looks at you, steady. Fear is loud, but it burns out. Coffee is quiet, but it brews forever. You leave through the back, careful. Outside, the sky is velvet black. Cat stares at you from a rooftop like it knows all your secrets. You make it home before sunrise. That night, you do not sleep. That night, the silence is thicker than coffee grounds at the bottom of a cup. You wake slowly the next morning, feeling the weight of yesterday's tension still pressing on your chest. The city feels different. Not quieter, but more watchful. Like a beast that's been startled and now surveys its territory, sniffing for intruders. Outside, life tries to go on. A vendor hawks fresh figs. Children play near the fountains. A merchant arranges colorful rugs outside his stall. But beneath it all, you sense a ripple of anxiety, a hesitation in the air. The Sultan's ban on coffee is no longer a rumor or a threat whispered in dark corners. It is law, enforced with brutal efficiency. And the city's beloved brew, once the heartbeat of Istanbul's social pulse, is now an outlawed pleasure. Mainstream historical fact: Murad IV's coffee ban wasn't only about the drink itself. Coffee houses had become hubs for political discussion and dissent, places where ideas brewed as freely as the dark liquid in cups. The Sultan feared these gatherings, worried they might spark rebellion. So banning coffee was also about controlling conversation and, by extension, power. But here's the quirky bit. Despite the ban, coffee found ways to seep back into the cracks of society. In secret gatherings, disguised as herbal infusions or cleverly masked blends, people still found their fix. Some even claimed that to defy the Sultan was considered a badge of honor, like carrying a secret flame. You wander into a narrow alley, behind a row of shuttered shops. There you find a small hidden cafe, if you can call it that. A single candle flickers on a low table surrounded by mismatched cushions. The smell of roasted beans, faint but unmistakable, hangs in the air. You sit. The owner, a lean man with a quick smile and fingers stained with coffee grounds, offers you a cup. No questions asked. As you sip, you hear whispers of a plan, a rebellion brewing among the city's youth and coffee lovers. Not just about coffee, but about freedom, expression, and the right to gather. Historians still argue whether these underground coffee meetings were widespread or the stuff of romantic legend. Some say they were rare and risky. Others believe they were the true lifeblood of Ottoman resistance. Fringe tidbit. Legend has it that a secret society called the Order of the Bean operated in Istanbul during Murad's reign, meeting in tunnels beneath the city. They supposedly encoded their messages in coffee grounds patterns and used sesame-shaped rings as secret tokens. Whether true or not, the story has persisted, whispered in coffee houses for centuries. You finish your cup and step back into the sunlight, feeling a strange mixture of defiance and hope. The city is alive, even under the shadow of prohibition. You realize coffee is more than a drink here. It's a symbol, a ritual, a rebellion steeped in every sip. And you know the story is far from over. The days stretch on, and whispers of the coffee ban ripple through the empire like a secret wave. You find yourself drawn back to the Grand Palace, where the Sultan's ministers debate how to enforce the decree. You listen from the shadows as they argue over the practicalities, how to patrol the streets, who should be the informants, and whether the punishment for brewing coffee should be death or exile. It's a grim business, mainstream historical fact. Murad IV was known for his harsh enforcement of laws, whether banning tobacco, alcohol, or coffee. His personal patrols reportedly roamed Istanbul at night, disguised as commoners looking for rule breakers. This direct approach was both feared and respected. But here's a curious detail. Some accounts say Murad himself was a coffee lover, often indulging in secret despite his public bans. The Sultan's contradictions only added to the city's fascination with coffee as a dangerous, irresistible vice. You imagine the Sultan, cloaked in shadows, savoring a clandestine cup, while his soldiers shut down cafes and arrest baristas. The irony tastes bitter. As you drift through the market square, you notice how the ban has altered daily life. The coffee vendors are gone, replaced by herbal tea sellers and spice traders. The usual hum of caffeine-fueled chatter has dimmed, replaced by hushed conversations and cautious glances. Historians still argue whether Murad's coffee ban had lasting effects on Ottoman society, or if it was just a temporary hiccup in a culture deeply entwined with coffee. One fringe tale involves a coffee merchant who, upon capture, supposedly swallowed a vial of coffee grounds to hide the evidence. The merchant's loyalty to the bean was so intense that he preferred poison over betrayal. You smile at the absurdity and continue wandering, feeling the city's pulse slow without its beloved brew. Coffee, once a daily ritual, has become a forbidden fruit, sweet and dangerous. But the thirst for it remains. And somewhere in the shadows, the wheels of rebellion turn quietly. You wake to a city transformed by silence, the familiar clatter of coffee cups replaced by a quieter rhythm. Without the buzz of caffeine, conversations slow, merchants' faces lose their usual spark, and even the dogs seem less eager. In the royal court, rumors swirl that some elite nobles are secretly defying the ban, hosting coffee gatherings behind locked doors, under heavy curtains. Invitations are whispered, coded, as if coffee were now a secret society's badge of honor. Mainstream historical fact. Despite Murad IV's strict laws, coffee houses continue to operate clandestinely. The tradition of the Ottoman Kahvehan, the coffee house, would eventually become central to social and political life, proving resilient to the Sultan's efforts. Here's an odd bit. Some say these hidden coffee houses became early hubs of intellectual debate, poetry, and even political plotting. The coffee ban inadvertently gave birth to a rebellious spirit, with coffee as the underground symbol of free thought. You stroll past one such secret gathering, glimpsing shadows behind heavy tapestries, the faint aroma of roasted beans weaving through the air. The soft clinking of cups, muffled laughter, and low voices hint at stories told and secrets shared. Historians still argue whether coffee houses helped spark political movements later in Ottoman history, or if their influence is overstated by romantic tales. You think about how something as simple as a drink can ripple outward, stirring minds and challenging authority. Then, a stray cat darts across your path, knocking over a small pot. You pick it up and smile. History, it seems, has a sense of humor. As night falls, you realize the coffee ban, while aimed at control, couldn't quench the deep human desire for connection and comfort. The coffee cup, forbidden or not, remains a vessel of rebellion, of community, and of hope. And somewhere, beneath Istanbul's starry sky, the aroma of coffee lingers, waiting for the day it can rise again. The sun rises slowly, bathing the city in a soft golden light, as life resumes its delicate balance between tradition and change. The echoes of the coffee ban still linger, but they've become part of the city's layered story, one told in whispers, sips, and smiles shared over secret cups. You find yourself wandering toward a quiet corner of the city, where the scent of freshly ground coffee beans now blends naturally with the sea breeze and the calls of morning merchants. Mainstream fact: after Murad IV's reign, the coffee ban was eventually lifted, and coffee houses re-emerged even stronger, becoming vital social hubs throughout the Ottoman Empire and beyond. Quirky tidbit: legend has it that the Sultan himself, in his later years, couldn't resist a cup or two of the forbidden brew, perhaps a private indulgence behind closed doors, a small rebellion of his own. As you stroll, you reflect on how coffee's journey from exotic import to everyday ritual mirrors so many human stories of desire, defiance, adaptation, and community. Historians still debate the full impact of Murad IV's ban. Was it a futile attempt to control, or a catalyst for the rich, vibrant coffee culture that thrives even today? You pass a quiet cafe, its windows fogged with morning steam. Inside, a young barista skillfully prepares a cup, steam rising in soft spirals, a moment of calm artistry. You settle nearby, the soft murmur of conversation weaving around you, feeling the gentle hum of history and humanity blending together in a shared experience. Now, as the day moves forward, you carry with you the stories of emperors, rebels, scribes, and secret coffee drinkers, all woven into the rich tapestry of this city. And as you take your own first sip of the day, you smile, knowing that every cup holds a world of stories waiting to be discovered.